everyone, welcome back in. It's another episode of the Wobcast 2.0. I'm your host, Wobby, Mike Wobshaw, with you as always here to talk Vikings as we break down the New Year's Eve loss to Green Bay. Look ahead to the season's final regular season week where the Vikings travel to Detroit to play the Lions and are still fighting for a wild card position as the Lions fight for the NFC's number 2 seed. A lot to get to as we discuss the Vikings and their prospects for the postseason, and maybe take a peek into the offseason as well, as a very meaty, busy offseason is in store for the Minnesota Vikings. To talk about all of this, no one better to join me than my partner and co-host Giles, who joins us now. Hey, Giles, how you doing?
Hey, Happy New Year. Today is, kind of the first time we're recording here in the new year, and it's the ultimate Monday, right? The ultimate reset day. Because at the end of the day, whenever there's a new year, you get to try to think about new year, new me. What do you need to change? What do you need to upgrade? What do you need to stop? And I think that translates very, very effectively over to the Minnesota Vikings because in a lot of ways, I know a lot of fans are clamoring for them to hit the reset button now that they've lost against the Packers. That was kind of an ugly win, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Packers game and where we need to go here for the next 7 days and over the next offseason.
Yeah, and I have a couple of points from the Packers game. We were in the building for that. I presume you were watching from the comfort of your own home.
Yep.
So, we experienced it in different ways, but I think we probably saw the same things. But I do think you bring up a good point about where are you casting your gaze right now as a Vikings fan? Is it, are you holding out hope that you can cash the 4-team parlay it would take to get into the playoffs? The Vikings have to win, Seattle has to lose, Green Bay has to lose, and then either Tampa or New Orleans have to lose. They play each other, so as long as that game doesn't end in a tie, that's a 4-team parlay. I don't know how much experience everyone listening has trying to cash 4-team parlays in the NFL, but this that doesn't happen very often. That's what has to happen for the Vikings to make the playoffs. Now, it's possible. It can happen, certainly. And some people are focusing on that and will be holding out hope for that. But I think what you're alluding to, Giles, is there's another fraction of or segment of the fan base who maybe is more realistic and is wondering what's in store for 2024. And to that end, winning this game is not beneficial for you because, your draft position, your waiver position, all of that hinges on the outcome of this game. And it's obviously better for those ventures if you lose. So there's 2 ways you can look at it. Being a 15-year veteran in the business, am conditioned to always want to win. Always is probably a word you should be careful using, right? Because there are no exceptions with always. So, if you're looking to get a top-tier quarterback in the draft, or if you're looking to potentially trade up into the first 5 picks of the draft, it's much easier to do that from the 9th or 10th position, which the Vikings will have if they lose, than it is from 16 or 17, which is where they'll be if they win. So, that's a discussion maybe for another day. I think for today, we sort of focus on the Lions and what happened with Green Bay. What do you have to correct, and how do you beat the Lions? But, I'll give you a minute to sound off on that. I think those are 2 very different paths that the Vikings could go down. And again, I tend to be more on I think you benefit more from winning and making the playoffs, even if you have no chance of making any noise. I think what that does for your program and your culture is a bigger plus than picking 11th instead of 16th.
Yeah,
but
100%.
It's not always that simple,
Yeah. And I do believe that the Vikings do lose on Sunday against the Detroit Lions. Your draft position ranges anywhere from the 9th overall pick to the 12th overall pick. So there are a few scenarios in which you lose that you get a top 10 draft pick. With that being said, as an ultimate fan of football, and it's, I think you're on the same page, I'm never a fan of losing. I think the goal should always be winning. So I think keeping that in mind, especially with having Brian Flores in the building, someone that is in an active lawsuit over the idea of winning and losing, we're going to try to win. I think that is pretty clear. Now, will we win? That's another story, but I think there will be an attempt to win. And I think the posture needs to reflect that. But when you evaluate what happened against the Green Bay Packers, I think the entire loss is on Kevin O'Connell. I know that may be a hot take in some people's minds, but I think a lot of people look at Jaren Hall's performance and they're like, we saw it. He's no good. Now, to be very clear, I am not claiming that he is good. I want to be explicitly clear on that take. I'm not rooting for Jaren Hall necessarily, but I think we went into that game with the exact wrong game plan. When we were trying to achieve success against the Packers, I think pretty pretty consistently, we had 7-step drops with Jaren Hall, and our offensive line could not pick it up. Now, I don't want to reveal the PFF rankings too much there, but Garrett Bradbury ended the day with a 5.3 pass blocking grade. Not 53, 5.3.
Ouch.
That is probably the worst pass blocking grade I've ever seen in my life. And that's right up the interior, right? So when you're looking at 7-step drops, you're trying to have long developing plays, trying to throw the deep ball. That is not going to happen when you have interior offensive line crumbling like that, period. Now, maybe that's Kevin O'Connell not realizing that the interior couldn't hold up against the Packers defensive line. But at the end of the day, that absolutely fell apart, and he should have adjusted immediately. And when you think about Jaren Hall's areas of strengths, I don't think it's in that game. I think they should have had the rollout game with play action. I think there was just simply the wrong game plan. So at the end of the day, when you're thinking about going against the Detroit Lions, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm actually of the frame of mind, why not give Jaren Hall another try and go at it with a different game plan? Because at the end of the day, I think Nick Mullins is who we thought he was. And, I think there is more upside to be had if you try to play Jaren Hall and change your game plan to more effectively leverage his strengths, if that makes sense.
It does. I think you could go back and look at the tape, Giles, and see some open throws that were there for Hall that he didn't take for whatever reason. Either he didn't anticipate them or he felt pressure and had to move off of his spot, whatever. So I think there's another side to that, but I don't know that I would aggressively take that over yours. I don't think you're wrong at all. You do have to always meld what, as a play caller and play designer and coach, what is my philosophy? What am I asking the team to do? How have we built this with who is actually pulling the trigger here, and can they do that? Right? There's all sorts of, inspirational sayings about, how are you evaluating something? And, if you're evaluating, a monkey and how well he can swim, you're not going to think a monkey's a very great animal, right? But that's not what monkeys do. And so, I'll sort of compare this to a college quarterback who gets a lot of high praise and a lot of criticism, and that's Michigan's J.J. McCarthy. For anyone who watches college football, Michigan's undefeated, just won the college football playoff semifinal last night in the Rose Bowl over Alabama, and they're undefeated and playing for a national title. Their quarterback, who's an undefeated starting quarterback this year, doesn't strike me as a guy I'd want to draft high and build my franchise around. And if you look at it through that prism, you'd say he's not very good. J.J. McCarthy is not good. But J.J. McCarthy is a great quarterback for the University of Michigan and for the way they have it built. He's perfect for them. So, yeah, he might not be great for the Colts to draft, or I guess the Colts have Richardson. He might not be great for a team looking for a quarterback to draft, right, high. But for Michigan, he's exactly what they need. And so, Jaren Hall might not be able to do what Kirk Cousins can do, but what can Jaren Hall do? And that's what you need to do against the Detroit Lions if you're playing the Detroit Lions. And I think that's what you're saying, and that's not what they did, it would appear, against the Green Bay Packers. So, I wouldn't totally give up on Jaren Hall as an NFL prospect. I certainly wouldn't bet on him as being the answer for the Vikings, but I don't think that they should necessarily cast him aside and give up on him. So,
yeah, because I think they tried to go into the game plan thinking they had Kirk Cousins under center, and Jaren Hall and Kirk Cousins are different players. Yeah. And with the same spirit that we've had, kind of rooting for Jaren Hall to get some field time and some play time, we don't know what he is. So let's give it a shot. And I don't think we gave it a proper try. I think we went into it with the wrong game plan. So in the spirit of identifying, is he a guy? I think we should still give him another shot, because at the end of the day, I don't think that Nick Mullins necessarily gives you the same or a better chance to win. I think he has a more effective route to getting yards put on the field. Like, he's going to push the ball down the field, but his propensity to throw picks is also going to train wreck that. I truly believe that. So when I think about the net positive versus net negative with both quarterbacks, I still think it's worth giving Jaren Hall another shot. Now, I could be convinced that saying that's not the right route here, but I think given where we're at in the season and the unlikelihood of moving forward, I think still with the intention of winning, give him a shot, have a much better game plan designed to fit his strengths.
Yep, I agree with you. And actually, what we're talking about right now sort of is related to. I had two takeaways that I kind of wanted to bring up with you, and one of them is how strikingly obvious it was that the quarterback path the Vikings and Packers are each on right now are so divergent and different. We see a Vikings team with their franchise quarterback hurt and unavailable, and they have no one there to pick up the pieces, and you compare that to the Packers, who are moving on from a legend in Aaron Rodgers with a young quarterback in Jordan Love, who is the answer. They do have the answer. Now, I'm not going to suggest that Jordan Love is going to be what Aaron Rodgers was. Almost no one in NFL history has been that. But, Jordan Love was dominant and in command on Sunday night. He was making throws and plays that were unbelievable to see in person, and then to go back and watch it again was even more impressive. Off-platform throws, lowering his arm angle, accurate deep throws off his back foot. The Vikings are disguising coverage, and Jordan Love's one step ahead. It was very impressive, and if you are a Jordan Love person or just a Packers person, you have to be feeling very good about how that all looked the other night against the Vikings.
100%. And I think when you look at Jordan Love in comparison to where he was, even when we played them, much less the beginning of the season, the game has clearly started to slow down for him. And he is now starting to dissect defenses and really be dominant. Even looking at the PFF grades, he was one of the highest graded players on the field across both teams on Sunday. He had a 90.8 grade across the board. He did phenomenal in every category. And he's starting to become kind of a prospect that makes me think that the Packers are the luckiest franchise in NFL history. 3 quarterbacks in a row. Now, do I think, like you said, he is Rodgers yet? No, but considering where he was before and the amount of progression that he's had throughout the season and where he's at today, I'm really interested to see where he'll be this time next year, because if he continues on this upward trajectory, he's going to be a dominant quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, it was how he played on Sunday night is what Matt LaFleur, like if you said paint a picture for where Jordan Love should be at the end of his first year, what would it look like? That's what it would look like. Like Matt LaFleur had to be leaving the stadium, riding the bus, on the plane, and just be sky high, cloud nine. Now, that's not how Matt LaFleur wants it to go at the end of next year. He wants it to progress and be even better than it was. But for like end of first year as starter, what should Jordan Love look like? Matt LaFleur's would be like this. This is what it should look like.
Yep.
So, congratulations to them for being in that position, and the Vikings can only hope that's where they are a year, maybe 2 years from now with whoever their next quarterback is. But it was just very, very impressive. It was a very strong performance from the quarterback. And my second point was, we're wrong often enough on some of our predictions, Giles. We were spot on about our fears of how that game would go for Minnesota. And I thought the dagger might have come almost in the first quarter on the Jaden Reed touchdown because, we talked about how we were skeptical of the Vikings' ability to win a game or to keep pace with the Packers in a high-scoring game here. And for Green Bay to take a 10-0 lead before the first quarter was over, given what was happening with the Vikings offense and quarterback, I thought that was too tall of a mountain for them to climb. And Jaden Reed is absolutely an emerging problem for the NFC North for other teams because he's fast and good. He runs good routes. And the last thing you would want is A, to see Jordan Love progress the way he has, but then B, for him to have an awesome target to use. And Jaden Reed is that. And that touchdown pass to Jaden Reed, the Vikings were disguising their look there as like a single high state, a cover 1 or cover 3 look, and it was actually cover 2. And I think it might have been might have been Pace running down the middle of the field there in cover 2, trying to guard Reed, and Reed was running down the seam, and it was just a perfect throw a really good route. And I thought, and I didn't see all of that live. I just saw the touchdown pass and going down 10-0, and I thought that they were in trouble. But going back and watching it, it was just a very impressive play by Green Bay, and you couldn't help but be discouraged about the Vikings' chances for the rest of the game there. That sort of unfolded the way we feared, I thought, Giles, is it got into sort of a track meet for Green Bay, and the Vikings had trouble keeping pace.
Yep. And the Vikings simply don't have the secondary to be able to keep up with the track meet in that regard. Because, and we've talked about this before, but the entire Brian Flores defense is predicated on manufacturing pressure and disguising looks and putting as many guys on the line as you can and having those guys make decisions and based on what they see, decide what they're going to do from there. And that only works if you're able to then actually create pressure with the raw talent that you have. And we can't get pressure right now. We simply cannot. The only way we've been able to manufacture pressure this year is simply by manufacturing it. But if you figure that out as an opposing offense, you're going to be able to slice and dice because our secondary is relatively vanilla. It's just, it's hard to see when you don't realize what's going on. But once the quarterback understands, it's easy to dissect.
Yep. I think you're right. A lot of the success on defense for the Vikings this year, which has been fun to watch, it's been a product of smoke and mirrors. And you and I saw a interesting stats on Brian Flores' defense and discussed it a couple weeks ago. And at that time, the Vikings have the most cover zero blitzes, the most times where they only rushed 3 and dropped 8. They had, I think, the most cover 2, the least cover 1. These are all very extreme outcomes, extreme stats to have, and the Vikings have all of them at the same time, which tells you that Flores is doing a lot of different things schematically because he knows that what you're saying is true, Giles. They have to manufacture their success. It's not purely because of talented players. It's coached and schemed. And I think that Flores would love to move on and not have to do that so much next year and the year after, but he needs more talented players before he can do that. But I think Flores and the scheme is part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I would really, if I were the Vikings this offseason, if I was Kwesi and O'Connell, I wouldn't hand Flores the keys, but I would very much listen to him about the players he wants to do what he wants to do, because I have a feeling he is very dialed in. I think he's myopically dialed in to what he wants to do, and he knows the players and the types of players he needs to do it. So I would really be in tune with him on that this offseason.
Yep. I completely agree. Don't necessarily give him the absolute keys, but listen to exactly what positions and what players that he wants specifically. Now, I would be very interested to see what that answer is, because on one hand, I think, and this is probably where my answer solidifies, I think it's on the defensive line, more particularly on the interior. He needs an interior push guy that can get home, because the problem with their entire defense right now is that we have to push and push and push, and we have to manufacture smoke and mirrors, like you mentioned, but we cannot get home. Let's get more pressure. Versus if you went, let's say if you did end up with a 9th overall pick, if you went and got a corner, would that help solve your defense? And I think if I had to pick between one of the two, I think I would pick an interior guy, as unpopular as that is maybe to say, because at the end of the day, I don't know if I necessarily love any of the corners that are going to go top 10, or at least that you're going to get at the 9th overall pick. I'd much rather get an interior defender, but I'd be interested to see what his answer is and how that affects the rest of his scheme.
Yeah. I think from that standpoint, what's interesting, Giles, is if you look, and we can get into PFF grades now if you want, but if you look at how the individual in a vacuum performances unfolded, I have a feeling that it's kind of a frustrating situation, because some of the players who probably graded well are not necessarily the guys you're hoping play well for the future of the defense. That's just my feeling on that. Although I think Tonga's one of the guys who played well, and I don't think he's played well all year, but I think he played well against the Packers. But I have a feeling the secondary guys weren't great, and edge rushers weren't great, and that's got to be really frustrating for the Vikings, because if they could have it their way, they'd have Mekhi Blackmon play great and Byron Murphy, who didn't play but play that position, play great, and Danielle Hunter play great, and then not have the interior guys play great because they already know they didn't have a great season. But I think it kind of was the inverse of that. I have a feeling that that's where it's going to go. So defensively, from a PFF standpoint, talk to us about who played well, because I have a feeling it was some of those interior guys, and one of them is a veteran. Harrison Phillips was a guy who stood out to me. I also thought Ivan Pace played well. Let's see. Let me pull up my guesses here. I had those two guys, Pace and Phillips, were my two guesses for top fives. I thought everyone on the outside, corners had a hard time, safeties had a hard time. I thought Harrison Smith was uncharacteristically not very impactful, but I thought Pace and Phillips were two guys who looked pretty good.
100%. Well, I'll get the negatives out of the way first. Mekhi Blackmon was the worst graded player on the field on Sunday. He ended the day at a 29.2 grade. Horrible. And unfortunately, Caleb Evans didn't do much better. He was the third overall worst player on the field. He had a 30.1 grade. So when you think about, your left and right cornerbacks, very severe performance. That was not good. We got absolutely torched in the secondary. Unfortunately, Harrison Smith was the fifth worst player on the field at a 51.1 grade. So when it came to your secondary, we had some severe struggles. And when you look at cause and effect, I think that's partially because of pressure. But when we look at the kind of the positives, which could be converted into negative depending on how you look at it, the fifth best player on the field was Lewis Seen, ironically. He hasn't really made the field all season. Now, granted, he only played 8 snaps, but he got a 66.3 grade, but he actually made the field for the first time in a long time, considering that he's a first-round prospect. So really interested to see the fact that he was able to get some attention there. And then coming in at number 4 was Ivan Pace Jr. at a 67.5 grade. So like you mentioned, he was one of the bright spots in the defense on Sunday. But coming in at number 3 was Anthony Barr, only played 8 snaps as well in comparison to Lewis Seen, and had a 68.7 grade. I think it's also an interesting trend that out of the 3 out of the top 5 all scored below a 70, which is not a great look if you want to have a well-performing defense, if your top performers are less than a 70. But then coming in at number 2 is Harrison Phillips, coming in at a 70.3 grade. So just above that threshold. Had a pretty decent day across the board, but definitely struggled in the tackling game. He had a lot of missed tackles, which is gonna ding your score, obviously. And then coming in by a wide margin at number 1 is Kyrie's Tonga, coming in at a 92.6 grade. He did phenomenal in pass rush. He had 2 quarterback hurries. He was just all over the place when it came to get some interior push. Now, he's a guy that was really high on going into the 2023 season, and we have not seen a lot from him.
Too.
So if you could find a way to manufacture him having a consistent performance like this, I think he'd be exactly who you want in your defensive line. But if you have an up and down season like this, that's hard to predict success for the 2024 season. So really interested to see what they do in the offseason when it comes to Kyrie's Tonga. But ultimately not a great day for the entire overall defensive output.
Yeah, it was sort of hard to find someone who you liked enough to predict that they were in the top 5, to be honest with you. And I struggled doing that. I also kind of struggled doing that on offense, but they lost 33-10. So that really shouldn't come as a surprise. And, one game is not going to make or break a season-long evaluation on a player. So Tonga played great, but I don't think he's had a great season. All I think that does for him is, instead of just making him an automatic starter at that position going into the offseason, he's a guy that you pencil in there, but you'd be willing to use a resource to upgrade that position, right? So as opposed to some other areas where you're just like, he's good and we're not going to use many resources to upgrade there. Like at safety, I think the Vikings are pretty good at safety. Like that's a position I'd be like, you're not going to use a first-round pick on a safety. So, interior defensive line is a place where they could use a first-round pick. Like, like the Eagles are sure glad they did it.
Yep.
Right? Jalen Carter. Talk about a dominant player. Yeah. So you get a guy like that, he can really help your defense. So, offensively, tough sledding there as well. I thought there were a few guys, though, who were pretty obvious that they played well. One was Johnny Munt. I thought Justin Jefferson was pretty good. And when I when I remembered back to what I saw in person, I thought some of the offensive line problems were interior. So I think O'Neal and Darisaw probably made good accountings of themselves. So Munt, Jefferson, O'Neal, Darisaw, I would put in the top 5.
There you go. Unfortunately, when it comes to the offensive line, I believe 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen scored below a 60. Unfortunately. And I think that was evident on our ability to move the ball down the field. Now, once again, offensive line performance is both dictated by the actual performance, their actual ability to produce good offensive line play, but also your schematics when it comes to quarterback play and things like that. And that's where I don't think our game plan going into that game was really primed for success. So I think partially these grades are dictated by scheme and the game plan going into the game. But coming in at number 5 was Brian O'Neal. He had a 63.7 grade, did all right. Now I will say throughout the course of the game, we'll get into this, the right guard Ed Ingram did go out with a shoulder injury, so we had someone come in that had reduced snaps, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Yep, exactly. And then coming in at number 4 was Justin Jefferson, coming in at 67.1 grade. He did struggle in the run blocking game, which I think knocked his score down quite a bit. Which we'll get into here in a second. But then coming in at number 3 was Blake Brandel at 18 snaps. He had a 71.8 grade. He actually did pretty well when it came to the right guard position. Every time he's played right guard, he's been a decent pass protector, has been a little bit up and down in the run blocking game, but when asked to play right guard, he has done relatively well. So I think when it comes to a backup position, I'm okay with him having a kind of a guard status. So really excited to see that. And then coming in number 2 was Johnny Munt, coming in at a 73.4 grade, did well in pretty much every category, played 41 snaps. So clearly he's taken over the TJ Hawkinson role with TJ Hawkinson being out. So really excited to see that. Yeah. Exactly, 100%. Did well in all those categories. And then coming in at number 1 is no surprise. That's Josh Oliver, coming in at a 77.8 grade. He's been consistently exactly what we wanted him to be across the board. Great in pass blocking, great in run blocking, has been a decent guy in the receiving game. I'd like to see him integrated a little bit more into the receiving game. But at the end of the day, he's been a solid prospect being that left tight end. So ultimately, decent performance for those guys at the top. But ultimately, when you think about the offensive line play, once again, Ed Ingram and Garrett Bradbury were the worst players on offense on Sunday. Ed Ingram being a 43.5 grade and Garrett Bradbury being a 36.8 grade. It'd be really interesting to see if we make some changes on the interior over the course of the offseason because I think Garrett Bradbury has also kind of slid back to his true form in the games of late. So I think that's going to be an issue, especially if we try to move forward with a more of a statuesque quarterback under center. So it'd be really interesting to see what we do with that interior.
I mean, I think they should have 2 new start. I think Reisner should be re-signed, and they should have 2 new starters in there. I mean, the Reisner thing, like, people were calling for him for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then they finally did it, and it worked. So, that's what I'm hopeful that they do. That's what I would do if I were them. It's easier to say it. It's harder to do it, but that's where I think they should go. I'd be curious, Giles, since you have the data in front of you, walk us through Ty Chandler and how PFF graded him in different areas of the game.
Yeah, that's a great question. Ultimately played 30 snaps. He was in the kind of a receiving category for 10 snaps, but ultimately he had a 63.6 grade. And when it came to the actual run, he was a 59.4 grade. And when you look at our box score, I'm just pulling it up here. Ty Chandler averaged 4 yards a carry. He had 40 yards over 10 carries, so did okay. His longest carry was 9 yards. So clearly he got the workhorse portion of all the snaps because Alexander Madison was next and he only got 3 carries. So Ty Chandler did get 3 times more than what Alexander Madison got. But Alexander Madison, although he got 3 carries, did achieve 17 yards. He had 5.7 yards per carry. So really interesting to see that shift there because ultimately, I think Ty Chandler was kind of sidelined for most of the season. They definitely led with Alexander Madison. I think that script has definitely flipped. And I wouldn't say I'm in love with 4 yards per carry. That's a lot better than where we were at before. We were in the 2 yards per carry category. That's where you can have a decent run game. And at the end of the day, when you look at our entire performance as a whole, we did end the day at 4 yards per carry across the board. Now, unfortunately, the Green Bay Packers had 8.6, or I'm sorry, they had 4.5 rather yards per carry. So they were better than us, and they dominated in that way. They were able to control the time of possession. But ultimately, it was fairly decent. But with that being said, I don't know if I necessarily trust Ty Chandler going in at RB1 going into the offseason.
Yeah, maybe not.
I don't know. Maybe you disagree.
No, I can't say I really disagree, but I don't love the I don't love the concept of paying that position a lot
Agreed.
of money. And you're not
Agreed.
paying him a lot of money. And I don't know the contract details of Madison. I wasn't prepared to, go down that route. But I don't know if it's expensive next year or not. And I don't know if it is expensive, if you can even get out of it. But I just don't like allocating cash or cap space to the position in general. And I think about some of the teams who I think are really good at running the ball. And I'm looking at Baltimore right now. They are great at running the ball because it's their philosophy and culture. It's their brand. They have a great offensive line, and they have a quarterback who's good at running, a running quarterback. But they don't have a bunch of high draft picks running the ball. They have J.K. Dobbins, who's hurt right now, but they have Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins and Justice Hill. And these guys run the ball great. And it's because they block it, and they have good concepts and a good scheme, and they block it right.
Yep.
So it's very easy for me to look at a Vikings box score or go watch a game, and I would say that the Vikings with Nick Mullins and Jaren Hall playing quarterback for them in a game they're trying to win should not have twice as many passes called as runs, but they do.
Yep, that's very true. Yep.
But I think Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips would turn around and say to me, well, yeah, but I mean, we can't block the run. So why are you going to call runs? We can't block for it, And I'm like, okay, well, then I guess, you got to fix that in the offseason because you can't keep having a 2-to-1 pass to run ratio with these quarterbacks. You just can't do that.
And to be honest, I think they partially did that to themselves. Now, although I think Dalton Risner has been a successful signing, I think they mishandled that signing in terms of how they wanted to utilize it, if I'm being completely honest, because obviously that signing happened immediately after Ezra Cleveland went down with, I believe, an ankle injury, or there was a certain injury where he was gone for a hot second. And before he was elevated off of IR, he was traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars shortly after we signed Dalton Risner. And you can make an argument that Ezra Cleveland was the best run blocker on our team. He was a decent pass protector. He's a little bit inconsistent, but he was a decent pass protector. But at the end of the day, he was a top 10 guard in a lot of categories, right? And I think we were always pushing for us to upgrade that position, right? But at the end of the day, we could have done far worse. And I think I was definitely pushing for us to sign Dalton Risner, but not to replace Ezra Cleveland, but rather replace Ed Ingram. And that's where I think we've had far more deficiencies. And I think our run game has definitely decreased after getting rid of Ezra Cleveland, because I think when you look at Garrett Bradbury's performance, was directly tied to Ezra Cleveland when it came to the success in the run blocking game. So I think you would have been able to consistently keep a high level offensive line play if you would have pushed Dalton Risner over to the right side and benched Ed Ingram. Now, obviously, then you wouldn't have gotten a 6th-round draft pick for Ezra Cleveland from the Jaguars, but I think you would have been in a much better position to kind of combat these running issues that we're having right now in the season.
Yep, you're right. And this is an area that we'll talk about in the offseason. How can the Vikings fix the interior? How can they be a better running team? And it's not just to save them in a spot where the Nick Mullins has to start for you. They're a better, more explosive offense if they can do this, even with Kirk Cousins playing. Kirk Cousins would benefit greatly from a 4.5 yard per carry run game with the play action and just with the way Cousins likes to play the position. That'd be very beneficial for the Vikings. So that'll be an area that they have to fix, and a conversation for us to have multiple times over the course of the offseason, which hopefully will not start the offseason next week for the Vikings. Hopefully they can beat the Detroit Lions here in the final regular season game of the 2023 season and get into the playoffs with some help. So let's talk about that quickly here and wrap this episode of the Wobcast 2.0 up. Vikings Lions Sunday from Ford Field. Kickoff is noon Central Time. The Lions installed as 5-point favorites, Giles. The game totals 46.5. The Vikings enter at 7-9 off the loss at home to Green Bay. Looking to secure a wild card berth. To secure a wild card berth, the Vikings must win, and then they need Green Bay and Seattle to lose, and then they need Tampa or New Orleans, who play each other, to lose. So just that game can't end in a tie. As long as that doesn't happen, the Vikings are good. They beat Detroit, and then they need some help from Chicago to beat Green Bay, and Arizona to beat Seattle. Detroit enters at 11-5. What a season for the Lions. They've won the NFC North, and they are looking to secure the NFC's number 2 seed. They also need some help in order to do that. They have to beat Minnesota, and then they need losses by Dallas, who is at Washington, and Philly, who is at New York. If those things happen, Detroit's the number 2 seed. If not, Detroit will be the number 3 seed in the NFC playoffs. So, we're going to see Detroit's best, Giles, on Sunday because they're angry from their controversial loss last week, if you watch that.
Oh boy.
A game in which the officials appeared to have screwed up a tackle-eligible situation on the game's, basically the game's final play, in which Detroit scored, but then the touchdown got called back. So they'll be angry coming off that loss last week. And then Dallas and Philly play the second games on Sunday. They play in the late games, the afternoon games. So it's like Detroit won't know if they can win the 2 seed or not when they're playing Minnesota. So they're all out to beat Minnesota, and then they'll sit back and watch Dallas and Philadelphia play their games. So we're going to get Detroit's best here. I saw a clip of Dan Campbell at his press conference this week saying he has controlled fury right now, and his team is ready to go this week. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know if the Vikings want anything to do with that.
I was going to say, that's the exact wrong team you want to play after that.
Yep. So I don't know how you see things unfolding here, Giles, but I think the Vikings are up against it on Sunday.
I completely agree. One, because I think the Detroit Lions are a better team at this time and place, but I also think, for the reason you mentioned, the Lions are angry. And when you mix some pretty amazing talent on both sides of the ball, plus pretty strong emotion, I think there's a chance that we get trucked on Sunday.
Yeah, you could. I mean,
unfortunately,
when that tackle eligible play got screwed up by the refs, it was a 2-point conversion, not a touchdown. But I mean, it was not controlled fury in that moment on the field. They were outraged, and now
justifiably so.
Yeah, now they claim to be channeling that fury toward their next game and opponent, which is the Minnesota Vikings. On top of the fact that they're just a very good physical roster anyway. When they don't have controlled fury, they're big bad bullies. Now they're even more so that way, and we're talking about not loving the interior of the Vikings offensive line and not necessarily loving the interior of the defensive line, and that's where Detroit is strong. It just kind of is a bad combination. We don't know who's going to play quarterback. I don't know what the avenues are for the Vikings to pursue here in this matchup, other than trying to get Jefferson loose, which is what you would do against any opponent because Jefferson's as good as there is in the NFL. So if it's Hall, I think they have to do what you said, Giles. I think they have to have moving pockets and short throws and half field reads and be methodical in their execution and see if they can string together some successful possessions and make a game of this. If it's Mullins, it's more of an air it out. It's more of a 5 and 7 step drop and get Jefferson and Osborne and Addison down the field. So I don't know which way they're going to go. You and I kind of think they should go Jaren Hall and see if you can learn a little bit more about your young quarterback in a game where, the degree of difficulty is very high. We'll see what happens, but I'd say of all the games we predicted this year, this would be you're the most hard pressed to predict a victory in this one, as you have been all season.
Yeah, 100%. They're a formidable opponent when you think about all the different categories in which the Detroit Lions put people on the field. I mean, even according to PFF, they are the 5 best overall team in the NFL when you look at every category. Offense, defense. I mean, the only category in which they're even slightly deficient when it comes to metrics is that they have a few missed tackles here and there. But other than that, they're a dominant team in a lot of categories. They're a team that's starting to click, and this is the exact wrong time to play them.
Yeah, you're right. And I was thinking about that with the Baltimore Ravens too, Giles, as just a team that's, every team's seasonal arc is different. Some teams play great right away and they tail off. Some teams are horrible right away and they ramp it up. Some teams are, progressively getting better all the time. The Ravens, the Lions are two examples of teams that in the final quarter of the regular season, getting into the playoffs, they are peaking, and that's perfect. That's exactly how you want to do it. Yep. You know what? Another thing too is the Lions played in a regular season finale last year where if they won, they couldn't make the playoffs. And if they won, it hurt their draft position. But they went out and won the game. They tried to win it and they won it. And I think that was good for their culture and good for their following season, which is now this season. So that's, something to point out as you think about the Vikings. And if you're one who's with good intentions, secretly hoping they lose because it's better for their draft position, just remember an example like that where Detroit, I think that them winning that game last year, I think they still would have been good this year regardless. But, I mean, that was indicative of their culture and their attitude last year. It's like, this win doesn't help us in the standings, but we're going to go out here and we're going to beat Green Bay and we're going to keep them from going to the playoffs. And this is part of our culture and this is part of who we are. So there's something to say about that for the Vikings,
Especially because they're now going to be the team that we have to go up against for the next years to come. Like they have now built a pretty young roster, but a very dominant roster. I mean, they're one above average cornerback from probably being the best team in the NFL roster wise.
Yeah.
I truly believe that. They're pretty phenomenal. I think the 49ers are maybe the most complete team this year. And I think the Lions are just one tiny step away from becoming that. I think the Jets were another one in this category, but obviously their quarterback went down and that train wrecked the rest of their season. But when it comes to the roster, the Lions are quite phenomenal and they're very young. So I think they're definitely something you need to keep your eye on, especially when you're thinking about building your own roster. You're going to have to think about that for the next years to come when it comes to winning the NFC North.
These are not your father's Detroit Lions, right? You're looking at the Lions as a team, a franchise you can sort of pick and pull a couple of, best practices from. I mean, it's been a while since you could say that about the Lions, but that's how they're building it and what they're doing. All right, anything left in your notebook here before we wrap it up?
One thing you did pull kind of words out of my mouth is the Baltimore Ravens. Not to be an anti-Minnesota Vikings fan and hoping that they win for the rest of the season and get into the playoffs and go make a run. I do think the Ravens are actually primed to win the Super Bowl this year. I am predicting a Baltimore Ravens 49ers Super Bowl, and I think the Ravens are going to come out victorious. They are clicking in all the right ways. As a football fan, I'm really loving what the Ravens are putting on paper.
It's hard not to like that style of play, not to like watching it, because it's big bad bully ball, it's smash mouth, blue collar, good defense, but it's not. And I like that, but some fans of football think that's boring because they want to see the scoreboard light up. But even though that's their brand, it's still fun to watch and exciting. They score a lot of points, and stylistically, the way they do it is good. Yeah, it's not Ed Reed, Ray Lewis, and the late, great Tony Siragusa. It's not sensational like that, but it is that brand of football that John Harbaugh has. And it's a brand that obviously works. His brother Jim has that brand of football at the University of Michigan, and they're obviously in the national championship game and have won 3 straight Big Ten titles. So it's a brand of football that works, and the Ravens do it in an entertaining way. They're fun to watch, for sure. Yep. So another franchise that you could pluck and pull best practices from, the Baltimore Ravens. Yes. I mean, they are very rarely a team out of the mix, out of the race. They're a perennial contender, and they've been that way since John Harbaugh arrived. They've been that way for almost 2 decades. So,
he's just like a Tomlin from the Steelers. They're just an iconic team that is able to weather a lot of storms.
Yep, and they stick with their core guys through thick and thin, right? I mean, I think the Steelers have had 3 head coaches in the last 60 years or some ridiculous stat like that, and The Ravens obviously aren't going to be moving on from Harbaugh anytime soon, and they've stuck with him through a couple of dry seasons as well. So there's something to be said for that consistency and knowing what your principles are. And yeah, you have to adapt and move on from mistakes and cut your losses, but you also need to know what your identity is and stick with it. And the Ravens are a franchise who have done that. So
yeah.
All righty. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. Let's watch a Vikings victory on Sunday and see what happens. And maybe our next episode, we're still talking about the Vikings' current season and see if they can make an improbable trip to the playoffs. That'd be a lot of fun. If not, we'll be back next week to kick off the offseason. We'll keep our eye on the playoffs and the like, but we'll sort of shift our focus to the Vikings offseason if things do not go the way we want them to go. But if they do go well this week for the Vikings, it'll be fun to talk about the playoffs. So on behalf of Giles, this is Wobby signing off for now. We remind you to like, subscribe, and follow the Wobcast 2.0 wherever you do that with all your other favorite football content. We're on YouTube, social media, Instagram. Go check out our Instagram handle. Lots of interesting stuff that Giles is posting there. And of course, we're wherever you find all your other favorite podcasts: Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So, on behalf of Giles, this is Wobby signing off for now. Skol Vikings.